Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Picicci, and I thank you for joining us today for the Unthinkable podcast. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our guest today. I'm very humbled and honored to be able to speak with Kamal Obeid. I'd like to tell you a little bit about him before we have him join us. So, Kamal Obeid is a board member and the manager for architects and engineers for 911Truth. He holds a master's degree in civil engineering from UC Berkeley. He's been practicing civil and structural engineering in the San Francisco Bay Area since 1980. He is a licensed structural engineer since 1985. Kamal specializes specifically in structural steel building analysis, as well as investigating structural failures of steel frame buildings. At one point, Kamal actually served as a volunteer for FEMA, investigating earthquake failures, and he is a longtime member of the Structural Engineers Association of Northern California. Kamal, I'm going to add you here, and I'm so grateful for you joining us.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks for the very fluffy introduction. Appreciate that.
Hey, we're just going to talk about the facts today. Thank you so much for joining me. Leading up to this interview, I was reminiscing on my own experience with exposure to architects and engineers for 911Truth. I remember first hearing your name when I watched experts speak out in 2011 or 2012. Of course, I had already considered the 9/11 issue deeply, but finding other engineers who had so much courage to speak out really inspired me. So it's truly a dream come true to have you here to be able to interview you today and hear your thoughts about this difficult and controversial topic. So thank you.
Thank you. We were much, much younger then. That
I
was,
was. I'm in my 30s. Go ahead.
yeah, I just, just 13 years ago is a long time. We've been at it for quite a while now, trying to
Yes,
trying to
I
make
was.
some change, but we're still at it.
We are, and I'm so grateful for people like you who are still at it because just because this happened in 2001 doesn't mean that the issues are less important. It doesn't lessen the tragedy and the loss of human life that was entirely unnecessary on September 11th. So I applaud you for your work and I look forward to helping our viewers understand more about your important work. I have a lot of questions for you, and I'm just really interested to hear what you have to say today.
Wonderful.
So, before we get into 9/11, I want to know a little bit more about what inspired you to become an engineer in the first place.
Oh,
Talk a little bit about your career and your background.
well, actually, I grew up in Beirut, Lebanon, and I had an uncle who was a civil engineer. My dad was a surgeon. They wanted me to get into medicine. And I started getting into medicine, but then I just realized that's not my passion. I wanted to get my hands dirty in soil and engineering. And my uncle was such an inspiration. He seemed to me like he knew everything. And we just, we used to hang out quite a bit with my cousin and my uncle, and we did a lot of things together. He was just such a cool person to me growing up that he really inspired me to take on civil engineering back then. But then, I just kind of waded through a variety of different majors in school and started in pre-med and then moved on to agriculture and then moved on to engineering. That was the one. I tried all these things and tried to find what was really most interesting to me. And I was very very into math and science, and I loved at the time. I used to love applying math to everything, trying to figure out equations for anything in this world. So that's how I kind of made my way into. But then when I first started, so I went to school in engineering here. I went to University of Texas at Austin, and then I went to UC Berkeley. And then I got into my first job was actually in in water resources, in designing dams and power buildings and all kinds of hydraulic structures, so to speak. But then
Sure.
again, I noticed that I wasn't really fulfilled in that
Mm.
field, and I wanted to move into strictly structural engineering. So I joined a small firm in Oakland, and I had to work for a licensed structural engineer in order to apply for my structural license. And the more I got into it, the more I enjoyed it, and here we are.
Well, I'm so grateful that you made that choice. I feel like your contributions to architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have been truly invaluable, and your leadership has been indispensable, which we'll talk about more later. It's interesting you mentioned almost going into medicine. I almost went into medicine. Part of my first undergraduate degree, I was pre-med, and so I did Calc 1, Calc 2, and physics. I was also fascinated by applied math. I remember one of my favorite things was optimization problems in calc to calculate areas of things. Um, I was fascinated with physics because understanding that mathematics is a universal language that allows us to describe our natural world helped me to understand things a little bit better. So I really enjoyed that part of my coursework, but my passion was always really taking care of people and relieving human suffering, I guess. So I ended up being a nurse, and I am a registered nurse. So I found my passion there. But as you'll come to understand more, and obviously since I'm here, this is also something that has, I wouldn't say fascinated me, but maybe concerned me, interested me over time because things just didn't add up. Um, Going off of that, talk about your experience with volunteering for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I heard that you had done some work for FEMA.
Actually, I've crossed paths with FEMA so many times on projects where we were, as an example, buildings we're trying to analyze and trying to prove that they needed to be upgraded. Um, and, I, and in many instances, FEMA was the reviewing agency. And so we had a lot of contact with them at that time. But then, as part of the Structural Engineers Association, we were connected with FEMA in some way. And when we had this earthquake in Southern California in 1994, it caused a lot of damage to steel frame buildings as well. And it was unexpected because those steel frame buildings were designed to that code at that time, and they were modern buildings. And then it was discovered that they were not what's called ductile enough, and they were kind of failing brittly
Sure.
in an earthquake. So FEMA was looking for structural engineers to actually join them in Southern California to review failed buildings, as well as to assist the building departments down there with processing whether buildings are safe or not safe, and helping them, get people back into their homes if the homes are safe, and so that kind of thing. So that's how that thing came about. It was a very interesting experience because the folks that I worked with were really good people, and they really cared about
Mm.
safety.
Well, I think that's maybe why I have become so interested. As you mentioned, you're an engineer and you're working for the sake of public safety. Um, you work on a global scale, I work on a small scale. And so I just appreciate your knowledge and experience. Is it true that you volunteered to go down to the pilot ground zero, and that you didn't end up going? Tell me a little bit about that
That's
story.
once again, I mean, after that major disaster, the FEMA was asking for structural engineers to go out and help assess the damage. And I was so interested in that because when I saw these buildings fail, at that point, at that time, it was everything was such a shock. It was it was quite a storm of emotions, and people were, confusion and all of that kind of thing. So, but the one thing that stood out to me is that those buildings failed so interestingly. I mean, it's not, I don't mean to belittle the event itself, but it was an interesting failure. How could they have failed like that?
Unprecedented.
I've never seen it, had never seen anything like that. It just didn't seem real to me. And I really wanted to study them. I really wanted to get in and understand why and how they failed, as well as many other engineers did at the time. So I did volunteer to join that group, but I was not accepted. I don't know. They maybe handpicked some people to go. Not sure why.
Interesting. Um, I'm wondering, what was your reaction on the day of 9/11? Did you have uh, any kind of gut reaction to the initial sight of the buildings being taken down or demolished, their destruction? Was it something that you realized initially, or was it something that you came to a realization of over time?
Um, well, I mean, it was obviously just like surreal, especially that day. So I wasn't really thinking much about the mechanics of the building destructions and all of that. There was all this other emotional stuff, and it just the whole thing just seemed so unreal to me that I was at the same time it became it's such a tragedy and such a disturbing situation because right after that we were just like on a war path.
Yes.
And that was the most disturbing part to me, that people were not really looking at this thing very carefully and jumping to conclusions. And we wanted to go to war. We wanted to go bomb, and
Mhm.
just without any real understanding of who's behind this. So that was the most disturbing part. So I was not really thinking about the engineering component of it, except that I was interested in understanding the failure of the building. And I did attend some structural engineers seminars that they had at the time. It was just right after the event, and there wasn't much that they could discuss. They thought they had some theories, and some of those theories are still in the NIST documents today. So, and there were obviously they're flawed. But
Yes. And that's why we're here today, is
right,
because obviously those analyses through the formal authorities do not make sense scientifically. Their investigations did not follow the scientific method, and people like you, maybe me, who understand what a valid scientific process is, can easily recognize that that didn't occur. I'm curious to know, what was the tipping point for you where it went from maybe confusion and trying to understand to, I understand that the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7 were demolished in a way that is other than what the American public was told.
absolutely. Really, the tipping point was looking at Building 7. There's so much emotional baggage attached to the Twin Towers that
Yeah.
at one point I just didn't want to, analyze it any further. But then when I saw Building 7, and some of my friends actually questioned me and said, "Did you look at that building? Did you see how that failed?" And I said, "Really, I hadn't looked at it that much." And then I met Richard Gage back in 2005, 2006. And, we continued to keep in touch until 2008. We had, when the when the NIST report came out on the destruction of Building 7, on the failure of Building 7, and we were asked to give an interview to the BBC, and Richard asked me to join him as a structural engineer, and so I had to really study the NIST report and study all the available information, all the evidence that was available at that time. But one thing that also struck me so forcefully is that you want to, when a failure like that happens, you want to look at the debris of the building and understand how this building failed. And I keep repeating that um, the same thing about that if we had an airplane disaster, and in the past, if you have an airplane disaster, then the Federal Aviation would actually, or the investigating body would actually assemble the whole plane, would take it into a big warehouse and put all the parts together, try to figure out how it broke apart. You would think that in a building that spontaneously failed, like Building 7, that you would keep the debris of the building and try to reassemble and understand, at least allow engineers to really examine the components of the building and make really just see the evidence is right there for you to evaluate.
Yes.
But as you know, and I don't know that the general public knows that the debris was made to disappear like the next couple of days, next few weeks. It was sealed off and shipped away and made to disappear. So there was no benefit. So when the NIST report came out, it was all speculation. They were speculating based on analysis, on a computer analysis that they put together, and it was very clear to me when I reviewed that report that they were just trying to make the analysis fit the reality and not really looking. So they were trying to fit the story available at the time. It was a terrorist attack. Something, it must have collapsed as a result of the terrorist attack. Period. No other further discussion. And even yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Julie.
No, I apologize for interrupting. It's almost like they had preconceived notions of what they wanted the conclusion to be and then worked backwards from that conclusion instead of actually following a valid scientific method, which, as you start with the evidence, form a hypothesis, and try to test that.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's exactly what was so disturbing to see that. And it compelled me to basically look deeper and actually get together with architects and engineers and for 9/11 Truth and help out any way I can to really make the public understand that this is not right, that we need another investigation. So it became a passion.
Well, I'm so grateful you had that passion. I'm curious, once you discovered and really came to that conclusion within yourself of, I understand that something very abnormal occurred at World Trade Center Building 7 and in the Twin Towers. What was your expectation of the engineering community's response to be? And did it surprise or upset you that they seem to have kind of left it in the dust and not really taken it up?
Very much so. Very much. It was very, very disturbing to see colleagues of mine don't want to touch it. I mean, I did contact some of my colleagues and very prominent structural engineers that in the Bay Area, and I knew them personally because we used to do events together at the Structural Engineers Association and spend a lot of time together. But then talking about 9/11 was different. It was just like, I don't want to touch this. Why are you doing this? They would ask me, why are you asking those questions now? Well, I remember one particular friend of mine who was a very accomplished structural engineer, and I called him up and said, please look at this thing. Does it not look like controlled demolition to you? And he did, and then he called me back and left me a message on my voicemail, and said, I agree with you, Kamal. Just it does. It looks like controlled demolition. And I had never heard from him again after that. He didn't want to touch it.
I can identify with that just because for my undergrad degrees, I went to Binghamton University. And so I had the pleasure of having many classmates attending the Thomas J. Watson School of Engineering. And so as we've remained friends over time, I mean, I know a ton of engineers working incredible jobs, doing amazing things that I will never even be able to understand. And even people who I thought were close friends, whom I shared my interest in this topic with, it's incredible how the conversation goes silent. And just as a sidebar, as a little joke, not a joke, I will say, um, anytime any professional man ever has shown me any attention that, if I don't want to have a conversation with someone or stranger, I can bring up this topic and they will just stop talking and leave me alone completely. Almost, and of course, I am so disappointed in that. Um, I I still struggle. Obviously, I struggle with this topic, and the only way I could describe my interpretation of the events that day was to call it unthinkable. I mean, it's not just an incredible tragedy where so many people died, where so many people continued to get sick after from being exposed to vaporized buildings, buildings that had all this particulate matter that's inhaled, and they're exposed to all of these chemical substances. But it's the idea that we were lied to. My understanding is that there were explosives placed in World Trade Center Building 7 in the Twin Towers. And I understand that that's the platform of AE911Truth. It's their mission to get that information out. But I think one reason maybe people are turning away from it is because it's unthinkable. It's so hard to wrap our minds around. Um, do you have any other thoughts on that? Like, have you experienced like personal adversity, or maybe friends who aren't engineers who are aware of your work or your passion, that has affected your personal life? Because I know it has for me,
Absolutely.
even
Absolutely.
within my own family.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep saying this. It's a party killer. I mean, it's just you want to
Perfect.
kill a
Yes.
conversation. You want to kill conversation fast? Talk about 9/11 at a
Yes.
party. That's
I,
what happened. So I have had so many friends. My social life was, I mean, was okay. Well, it wasn't really very active. I mean, but it was active enough that I would go visit friends and be at parties and start to talk about this thing, and that's it, man. You're done.
yeah,
Just we don't want. I mean, it has to do with. I think it has to do with the fear of if this is true. If this is, I say this is true, not if this were true. If this is true, then nothing feels safe. Nothing feels your security blanket is taken away from you. You don't want to go there.
absolutely.
It is hard to go there. It's just why? Why would you want to go there? It's just and unearth all this ugly stuff, and it's horrible. It's just how could this be an inside job? How could there be people with in our midst that are willing to go to these lengths for whatever it is they gained out of this? But what was most disturbing to me and why I became so passionate about this thing is not only the engineering component, but I could see our planet is being destroyed. Wars and we went on a war path and so much destruction and killing, and for what? What were we doing? If you cared about human rights, if you cared about social justice and all of that, I mean, it was horrible after 9/11. I mean, it's still to this day. It is so important. People think, okay, 23 years ago, this happened. Why are we still talking about it? It is very relevant today. It is so. I mean, look at what's happening: the genocide in Palestine and Gaza. I mean, this wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been allowed if just these awful things are happening now, and we're on a path into World War III, the destruction of the planet, the destruction of humanity.
Agree. Yes.
We got to wake up. We got to do something. We got it's just anyway. That's
No, it's true. We're our own worst enemy. And I resent when people say it's been so long, it's been 20 plus years, why are you still talking about it? I say one reason why I'm talking about it today is we have more research than ever. Hard scientific evidence that shows that the story that the American people were given, and the whole world was given on 9/11, cannot be scientifically valid. It is physically impossible. And so on that topic, I want to talk a little bit more about World Trade Center 7, because obviously it was something integral to you getting involved in this movement. And I know that you have a lot of knowledge about it. And so um, I want to talk a little bit about the University of Alaska Fairbanks study that was conducted by Leroy Halsey that looked more at an engineering model of the possibility of collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 comparatively to what NIST said happened, and then in reality. I understand that you know the significance of that scholarly paper. And, for me, when I saw that come out, it was a catalyst to say, we have enough evidence. I was already at the tipping point, but now it bewildered me why the world wasn't completely waking up. What was your reaction to the lack of uptake of the University of Alaska Fairbanks study's
That's a
results?
very, very good question. But let me just say that that study was very well done. And Professor Halsey just did an incredible job. That's his specialty, is finite element analysis and analyzing, they have all these different terms in engineering that use like elastic and non-elastic failure and that kind of stuff. And so he just took the whole gamut of engineering knowledge and basically did an incredible analysis of this building. What he tried to do is basically follow NIST's initiation of failure models and see
Mhm.
what this really. So if you take column 79 out and what happens, if you how are you going to um, make the building fail the way it actually did in reality? Where you look at the NIST model, they did a very elaborate model that came out in
Mhm.
2008, and they decided that it started only in one column, where that first column failed because it buckled because one of the beams fell off and it lost its stability, and so um, and so they did this very elaborate analysis and came up with a model. If you saw, I don't know if you saw the model where
I did,
the
yes.
actual failure that they came up with, where the cartoonish failure of the building, where it's the columns falling and the penthouse started buckling, and then the building started crumbling.
Yeah, a
That's their
crumpled soda can model is what
That's
I
their
called it.
model. That's their model. They stopped it right there. It was too embarrassing.
Yep, and they didn't even finish the model. And what Dr. Halsey found was that the only way that the building could have came down as observed with the speeds and everything observed was through the near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. Is that
Exactly.
correct? Am I
For
correct in
eight
my
for eight
understanding?
stories.
For
For
8
eight
stories.
stories. So you develop enough of what's called a pile driver. So you
Mhm.
take out eight stories, and the rest of the building would just come down and keep going down at free fall speed and then into its footprint. So for example, when he did he did a very thorough study of NIST analysis. So if you take that column 79, the building will not fail, but it will tilt a little bit. So, and then if you try to fail it some more, it's going to tilt and could fall on the side. But to get this perfect uh, collapse into its footprint is an art.
Yes. What I found so important about Dr. Halsey's study was not just the fact that he was able to, identify these things in a rigorously scientific manner, but that finally there was an explanation for what we saw on that day, which, to quote, I forget who said it on Architects and Engineers Experts Speak Out, but it appears to be a controlled demolition of a fully intact building. I mean, we know there were fires in that building, but has there ever been an incidence of these kind of steel frame high rise structures collapsing due to fire?
Never.
I, never.
These are the first. The
I
first
mean, what is
modern
going
steel
on?
buildings. Modern steel buildings that are designed to withstand hurricane force winds.
Yes.
And
And those beams are fireproofed.
that's right.
And just talking about World Trade Center 7, I'm familiar that there are some controversial and I think nonsensical arguments that maybe when the airplanes impacted World Trade Center 1 and 2 that fireproofing was dislodged, which may have, accelerated the ability. We're not going to go there right now, but just in terms of building 7, like I don't understand how the National Institute of Standards and Technology can even attempt to defend such an absurd conclusion that that 47-story high rise collapsed due to fire. Fire from office furnishings, we know, and I've heard you say it on the documentary, like you can't generate heat that high. Um, it just it's hard for me to even want to accept that we're being lied to so bad that I would like to use a term that I don't know that AA's ever used, but I will. It's called gaslighting. It's when you're being lied to the extent that you can fully see the evidence right in front of you and you're being told that your senses are failing you. That's the degree of, gosh, I don't even have a word for it, deception
Yeah.
that has been perpetuated in our society by those who must be responsible for this tragedy occurring. And it is traumatizing. It was a traumatizing event, but not being able to understand how it happened and why it happened only perpetuates that trauma. And it's not just for people like us who understand the scientific reality of the day. It's for everybody because everybody has been lied to. I want to ask you a specific question, and this is kind of technical. Um, so there's a professor, the last name is Bazant. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes.
So some of his analysis was important in the NIST report on the Twin Towers. Um, this week I saw that AE911Truth released a bulletin regarding this topic, saying that Roland Engel and Tony Zambodi, also two very important leaders in architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, have found mathematical errors in Mr. or Dr. Bazant's work. Can you speak a little bit more about that for those who haven't had a chance to read the bulletin and people like me who are not, so familiar
Sure.
with the math?
Let me just so the important thing to know is that Bazant came up with a theory of the failure of the towers at free fall speed. And right, I mean, like a couple of days after 9/11, just so he had something already drawn up to explain how these buildings failed. Then, of course, he embellished it and came up with what's called the crush up, crush down theory, crush down, crush up theory. So the piece at the top of the portion of the top of the tower just
Yeah.
fell and it crushed down the lower level, and it was just and then once it got to the bottom, then start crushing up. So the whole thing just so that's the theory in general, and it is flawed. It's full of flaws.
Yes.
And but the thing that's so disappointing about this is that NIST in their they did not they in their analysis of the Twin Towers failure, they did not do a comprehensive analysis by any stretch. They looked at initiating events. They just looked at how could this thing have started to fail. So in other words, and their explanation is that the fires actually heated the trusses so much that the trusses started sagging, and then the connection of the truss with the outside walls just kind of gave way, and the outside walls buckled, and the building just came down. And the way that NIST puts it, global collapse ensued. Period. There was no further analysis, and they referred to Bazan's paper as the exponential global. So that's why that Bazan paper is so important. It is so important for people to understand that this is what we're hanging this is a science that we're hanging our hat on, and we're saying that's how these buildings failed. So, but when you look at that analysis and all the flaws, the calculation errors, the exaggeration of the weight of the building, the exaggeration of the kinetic energy or the impulse momentum theory, or all these things are exaggerated to the point just to make it work, so that you actually have the building failing, the crushing down, and all of that. But there's no. I mean, it's just too theoretical off a paper to begin with. He looks at springs and how how a spring can actually deform as a result of something falling on it, and so that kind of thing. So that's what the engineering community, the mainstream community, is feeling comfortable with, and so that's why it's so important to basically talk about this, have a discussion about it,
Yes.
have a debate about it. The disturbing part, of course, is that Tony Zambodi and Richard Johns wrote an incredible paper on the Bazan theory and the mechanics of the building failure or non-failure that couldn't have failed that way. And the engineering mainstream association refused to even consider publishing it, even though it was very relevant to. They published Bazan's paper, but why would they not publish a questioning of something that is so outrageously flawed?
Absolutely. In your experience within the engineering community in other disasters or issues, my understanding is that it's common practice for peers to review one another. It's a very important component of scholarly literature and research. And this issue has not been treated like that. It's everyone seems to want to remain comfortable with the current story.
That's right.
And then when valid scientific arguments are raised by the minority, which would be, individuals such as yourself, it's almost like we're just not going to listen. We're just going to ignore it. We're going to try to make it go away. But the fact is that avoiding or looking away or pretending not to see human suffering, in my opinion, is inhumane. And that's what they've done here. The lies of 9/11 have been perpetuated so long that even now, on its face, the official explanation of the collapse of the Twin Towers and Building 7 on September 11th is so scientifically implausible. I mean, I find it outrageous, and I'm not even an engineer. Do you think that some of that outrage is what has driven you to be such an involved member of AE? I want to speak a little bit about more about what your goals are as an organization, the struggles you guys have, and after we'll talk about maybe moving forward and any new innovative ideas that we can come up with, because I mean, it's the lies of 9/11 are hard to stomach. And again, I know I overplay the word, but it's unthinkable for me to imagine that we've been lied about such a tremendous tragedy. So many innocent bystanders and first responders were murdered needlessly just going to work that day. So going off of that, let's talk a little bit more about what Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is hoping to accomplish through its work and raising awareness.
Well, really, I mean, what we're all about is to initiate an impartial investigation we don't. I mean, we've done our part. We've showed the theories, but we're looking at it from our perspective, but we need an impartial investigation. And it's interesting that some of these impartial investigations have been started in various different associations. And for example, there's one that started in England, where this major mainstream association decided that they want to look at this thing. They want to look at Building 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then our understanding is that once they realized that, they came to the conclusion that the Halsey report is really correct and the NIST report is not. Complete silence ensued, and so we haven't seen any reports come out saying anything. It's just like the whole study just came to a halt for some reason, for some odd reason, and we don't know where that pressure came from. The invisible pressure. That's it's just. But I mean, the thing is that I understand. I know that lots of people, lots of engineers, who wanted to speak out, and they work for bigger firms that have government contracts, and they're afraid.
Sure.
They're in a comfort zone. They don't want to upset that. I mean, do you want to destroy a career?
Yeah.
Fortunately for me, I had my own business, and I probably lost a lot of potential clients as a result of this, but I was able to manage and survive. But people who work for, that's their livelihood. How are they going to? It takes a lot of courage for them to, and I would applaud anybody from those firms that is willing to step forward and look at that. Let's have a debate, for heaven's sake. I mean, let's discuss this. Let's look at the theories. Let's look at other alternative opinions, as opposed to just one gospel that was
Yes.
imposed on the public.
And it seems like people don't even want to look. It's like their instinct is to look away. And as someone who's studied trauma, and a lot of life's problems are caused by trauma, I wonder if that's the reason why it's so hard for people to look at. But then you think, engineers specifically are called to defend and promote public safety. Obviously, what happened on 9/11 was not safe. The two tallest buildings in the world at the time were taken down in about 11 seconds each, with thousands of people inside and hundreds of people on the ground around. I don't understand, and I guess I still struggle with why it's possible that so many people can willingly turn a blind eye. It seems completely counterintuitive to everything I understand about the engineering profession. And to be honest, it's not to say that I'm judging people, but it's made me question the integrity of some of the engineers that I know whom have refused to hear me out on this. I mean, why can't we at least look at the evidence? If you have valid arguments to really mathematically accurately say it happened another way, I'd be willing to listen, because let's be honest, I wish it didn't go down the way it went down. I wish I could believe that it wasn't the presence of explosives or incendiaries that took down those 3 buildings. But let's say this: I was once a cucumber and now I'm a pickle in terms of my tipping point, and I'm never going to be a cucumber again. I can't unknow what I know.
Yeah.
I can't unremember hearing audio from the last moments of life from some of those people within the Twin Towers. I cannot imagine their unthinkable suffering they experienced. And the fact that now, over 2 decades later, we still have the majority of society scared, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a very, very good point. But I just want to add to that the fact that engineers have a special duty to actually seek the truth. That's the thing. That's one of the things that drew me to engineering in the first place is what's called the canon of ethics. And if
Mm,
you ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers,
yeah,
has published a canon of ethics, and those include that you have to seek the truth. You can't lie. I mean, you can't. You have to. It's not like if you're an attorney, you have to protect your client,
right.
even if they're lying. As
Sure.
an engineer, you can't do that. You have to basically get down to the bottom of the safety situation, whether it's safety or whatever it is, whatever it's an analysis that has to be truthful. Um, so I mean that's it. There's integrity of the profession is in question, uh,
Yes.
where people are not willing, or people who put the NIST report together are just trying to serve their client, trying to you know come up with a story that fits the official story. You're not supposed to do that as an engineer. So that's why it's so important. It's so incumbent on engineers to regain that integrity in the field. So it's our duty as engineers to basically talk about this, to debate this, to look at it scientifically, and not be blinded by emotions or the
Yeah.
official story that this is it, terrorism, it's a terrorist attack, they did it to us, so we can't even question that. Just so that's
I appreciate that. No, your insight is profound in a way. I admire you for being on the front lines of this unheard, ignored topic. And I think it's a real shame because we all know on September 11th, 2001, how we all looked on just trying to understand what was going on. And the tragedy for me that adds insult to injury is that now seemingly few are willing to look on. So I admire your work and the work of architects and engineers and those who've been involved with the organization over time in building this body of knowledge where even lay people who may have some scientific understanding, but I'm certainly not an engineer, we can be confident understanding that evidence because it is so important.
absolutely.
I'm curious what you think about. Okay, so we mentioned earlier how, I was young on 9/11. I was 13. I was a freshman in high school. I feel like maybe it might be easier for younger engineers, maybe in my generation, or people who may become engineers in the future who were born prior to 9/11, to look at it in a with a different perspective and maybe without so much of the stigma. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's an audience to this kind of information that may not have been explored fully yet?
Yeah, I think, thank goodness for young people. I mean, they're just so much is happening now to oppose these wars, and the aftermath of 9/11. You can see people that really think that the truth and justice is so important,
Mhm.
and they're willing to put their bodies on the line for that.
Yes.
So I do have a lot of hope in the coming generations of young people as well as professionals, to do the right thing. And I can see I mean, that's so hopeful, so inspiring to me to see that. So I have hope.
I do too, honestly. I mean, this feels like such an uphill battle. Um, I can only imagine the incredible hard work of you and everybody at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth over time to just continue to get the word out there consistently. I mean, it's not like AE's ever gone silent over the years. You guys have always been there to give us, all of the important information, and your organization has been integral into my understanding. I have to hold on to some hope that over time, people will continue to find the courage to speak out and look squarely at the information without bias or fear. But that can be really hard, as you know.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So before we wrap up, I acknowledge that some people maybe are seeing this video without having seen other information related to the controlled demolitions at the World Trade Center on September 11th. If What would your advice be to someone who's hearing this information for the first time and who may be obviously shaken but interested? What would you recommend if someone wanted to maybe learn more or get involved so that they could speak out, like we're hoping they will?
There's so much good information out there on the internet. And of course, I mean, AE911Truth, we have a wealth of information on our website for people to, and it's not all engineering written. I mean, it's written in terms that people of all walks of life can really relate to. So, so I would encourage people to visit our website, AE911Truth.org, and start there as an example for seeking more information. And with information, you have power. You have power, and you basically affect change through really educating oneself, and that's how you would seek the truth, is by knowing the path, by understanding how this could not have happened the way they say it happened.
Yes.
And just look at the literature. There's a wealth of literature that we refer to on our website as well, but out there, I mean, it's just, there's so much. I mean, of course, the easiest thing for people is to watch documentaries that were made about 9/11, and there's tons of them. For example, of course, the Loose Change that Dylan Avery put together. That's an awesome documentary for people to really start getting their feet wet in understanding the global understanding of the 9/11 events, not too technical. And then, if you are an engineer, then you should delve. It's your duty to delve into the technical aspects.
Yes, for saying that.
Yeah, and let's have a discussion. We should have, it's healthy to have a discussion, no matter how you look at it, even though it's controversial and difficult to talk about. But and even though it happened so many years ago now that you might say it's okay, let's move on. No, we cannot move on.
No.
There's so much
No.
baggage that is attached to that. We've got to keep at it.
I agree. Speaking of keeping at it, one of my last questions for you today is going to be, if there are any viewers who have seen this interview and are feeling inspired, like they want to get involved more, is your organization currently accepting like volunteers or anything like that? Or if an engineer wants to get involved,
Absolutely.
they can sign your petition.
Right.
What would you recommend?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, sign the petition. Uh, if you're interested in volunteering, of course, we always accept donations. So that
Yes.
gives us the ability to continue doing what you're doing.
Yes, because
Because
you are a 501c3 nonprofit.
that's right. It's a tax deductible contribution if one makes to the. I mean, it's if it's too daunting to be actually involved as a volunteer, which is, it takes a lot of time.
Understandable. Yeah.
You have to really get into it, and it's easier to make a contribution, then by all means, we're happy to accept that. I mean,
Absolutely.
your tax. Just think about it this way: your tax dollar going to war, or your tax dollar going to a good cause.
Ooh, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I feel that. I
Sending your money,
really feel that.
sending your money to war, to World War III, to starting World War III, or you want to seek the truth.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, there are people within your organization that this is what they are devoting their whole life to.
That's right.
Well, Kamal, I admire your work, your courage. I appreciate you so much taking the time to speak with me today and to continue to disseminate this really important information out in the world. It was an honor and like a humbling privilege to speak with you.
Okay.
And I look forward to just learning more and continuing to be involved and to see what can be accomplished when people who know the truth refuse to shut up.
Well,
So
thank you, Julia, so much for everything you're doing as well. You're putting your own time on this thing. You're not paid a penny for anything. You're just
sure,
doing it because you really believe it needs
I
to be
do.
done. So thank you.
Well, I'll say one more thing on that topic about belief. One of my favorite professors in college was a physics professor. He's not the one who we went through 1 and 2. We did a theoretical physics class. He told me belief is important, but it is beyond the realm of scientific validity. In this case, not only do I believe in the cause, but I understand the evidence. And those are the two important things that have
Well said.
brought me here today. So
Perfectly said.
thank you.
Thank you.
Kamal, thank you so much. I look forward to speaking with you again in the future. This has been truly an honor and a privilege.
Same as well. Thanks so much, Julia.
Thank you.